So this is the scavenger hunt part of Appalachian Spring for May of 2022. And this is the second video section for that. And this is about the scavenger hunt because we gave everybody a piece of paper that came in, children, adults, whatnot, and there are 17 items on here. And we're going to do the first 8 just in sequence so that you can see what people had to find. And we found that a lot of the adults had to look up things in their phones in order to identify the things that are on the scavenger hunt. It was a lot of fun. The prizes were tomato plants if you completed the whole list, or you could have a betta fish. I had bred betta fish in November, and they're now old enough to go home with people. And so we ended up giving away 3 betta fish and 4 tomato plants. And there were lots of children. The place was just chaos and people having a good time and parents helping their children find all these things and looking up things that they couldn't recognize. So we're going to go through and just in a sensible order. This was all scrambled up, so it was more difficult for them. But we'll show you what they had to see, what they had to look at, and what they had to identify. This is our first section, and it's an imitation Appalachian stream bed. And there are minnows in there, and there was a mud puppy, but she went home with someone last night, and so she isn't in there today. But she was hard to see anyway. She's sort of a black mud puppy on a black ground. But then people had to find the bullfrog. And it's not a real bullfrog, but I think he adds to the ambiance, don't you? And then the third one is a red Japanese maple tree. And there are actually 2. One is in a little bonsai pot right here, and one is in a bigger bonsai pot right here. We're going to move on to the great blue heron, who is stalking the baby fish that are in the bowl. And if with any luck, we'll get the baby fish in the bowl. The next area is the garden area, and this is the garden plants, and there were a lot more tomato plants, and they all went home with people last night as prizes. They had to find a plant that blooms in 2 colors, and that would be pulmonaria. Yeah, this is the pulmonaria, and it's got pink flowers and blue flowers on almost every stem. And so it's kind of a unique plant. It's grown for its beautiful leaves. It's called pulmonaria because they used to believe that these leaves in herbal medicine would help lung ailments, and so hence pulmonaria. And then the next thing they had to find was garden plants and seeds, and so the garden plants were here with many more tomatoes. And then these seeds here, they had to find that. And then the next thing that they had to find was 3 garden tools. So they needed to find a hand spade, a hoe, and a watering can in the garden area. Then the next thing they had to find was spring chickens, and these are, of course, spring chickens. And they are Mystic Moran breed chickens, which is a docile breed that lays chocolate eggs, chocolate-colored eggs. And they're a little chilly because I usually have this cage covered up a little bit more, and so they're huddling together. But they actually are pretty comfortable when I cover them up. And the last one on this, number 8, is a baby robin in a tree. They had to find the baby robin in a tree. Moving on. Solomon seal, which is, I think, an especially charming garden plant. Usually is in the woodland, and you don't see all those beautiful dangling flowers, but it's so artistically designed. The next thing is a praying mantis egg case that they had to find, and people did have to look those up in their phones to figure out what they were looking for. And we do have some little praying mantises in here. Don't know if we can get a shot on video, but there's a baby one right there in the top of the cage. It's right here, hanging upside down. And he likes to get up there and sun himself. And there are quite a number of them in here. I don't know how many. And Harry may eat a few before we're all finished. Harry is in the back there. He's a little anole. And he's not real keen about the filming business. He's usually quite charming, but he's looking suspicious. And the goldfish are there. They had to find goldfish, and they're grazing all the time. They keep their tank very clean. The next thing they had to find was a mulberry bush. And this stumped almost everybody. When you look up mulberry bush in your phone, what you get is pictures of mulberries. You don't get pictures of the leaves or the structure, so nobody could identify the mulberry bush. But this is a mulberry bush that we've been working with bonsai. It just was a volunteer, it came up in our yard, and we've been little by little shaping it into something. And so they had to find the mulberry bush. The next thing they had to find was a shrinking violet. Now we just said it was a shrinking violet. It's not actually shrinking, it's growing actually, but we talked about spring chickens and shrinking violets. Those are things that we use as metaphors for people all the time. So shrinking violets are people that get kind of reclusive and don't want to come out and talk to anybody. And the other thing they had to find was an onion flower. Now this is actually a giant allium, which is in the onion family, and it was broken off by the hail and the storm. They also had to find Boston ivy, and there's two places here that have Boston ivy. One is here in this arrangement of dogwoods, and the other one is over here in a spray coming down off the dresser. And then there's the dogwood blossoms, which were mercifully spared in the hailstorm. These were like the only branches left. Last but not least is moss in bloom. So the moss in bloom, there's moss everywhere. We have little moss gardens on every table, but this one is blooming. And that's the end of the Appalachian spring scavenger hunt. Do you think you would have been able to get a tomato plant or a betta fish, and which would you have chosen?